adopted, we were a little bit late bloomers on adopting no-till to some extent. We had been doing no-till since mid-'80s pretty much. But you know, we were still at the time seeing quite a bit of challenges in our system. Some of those are listed here. Soil erosion, all types, lack of diversity. In some cases, monoculture cash crops were being grown. We had corn, soybeans, you know, maybe a little bit of wheat. So not this extensive diversity of a crop rotation. So that was something we were kind of up against. After we learned what soil health was, we actually understood that we were decreasing our soil health all along while we're doing no-till. And at one time I thought if we could get the entire nation to do no-till, we'd have this wool, right? But that's a no-till field right there in that picture. I mean, there's obvious concerns there, and a lot of them are listed right here beside. So we were decreasing our soil health even though we thought we were doing good conservation-minded conservation practices. We also were seeing increasing soil temperature, and one big thing that started showing up was herbicide-resistant weeds. Even though we were doing everything that we thought was adequate, we were still seeing some of these pesky herbicide-resistant weeds starting to show up. So we were exposed to cover crops. I mean, cover crops are not new by no means, and they have been used, you know, in certain cases. But growing up on a dairy farm, we didn't have a specific cover crop. That was not its intended use. If it was planted, it was likely either grazed or it was going to be chopped, right? And it's going to be fed to the animals. So we were having something on the land, but it wasn't going to be utilized as a specific cover crop in the sense that we use it now. But learning about, you know, soil health, and I was kind of exposed to the benefits of mixed species cover crops around 2007 and how to increase soil health through following some principles. And it really kind of got my interest. And I was like, how are we going to make this work on our operation now? So, you know, a few questions come up. How are we going to seed, think about mixed species cover crops, how am I going to seed multiple seed types and sizes in one pass, right? I'm not going to make, if I'm doing a 4-way mix, I'm not making 4 passes. Best case scenario, I'm not making 2 passes. I want to do it all in one pass, right? Also, how am I going to get those seeds planted early? There's a lot of technology that can really afford us that opportunity now, but we're thinking back in 2007, 8, you know, cover crops were around, but they didn't have near the prestige that they possibly do now. So we had to figure out how we're going to get those seeds planted, whether we broadcast them or drill them. Also, we had to think about how we're going to get a good stand, considering maybe we're planting those later in the cropping season. Maybe it could be late November, December. What's that going to look like? Is there going to be benefits? Also, think about the spring, how we're going to plant in heavy residue. Are we equipped to do that? And also, one thing that was really intriguing is, you know, nitrogen. Keith mentioned that and kind of introduced it. How we're going to determine what nitrogen would be available from using a legume in that cover crop. So here is how we started. Again, we were corn, soybean, and some small grain at the time, and got exposed to that, and I was like, I need to get a mixed species cover crop, but I had standing soybeans. And Pop, if you want to chime in on what your thoughts were at the time, because I kind of have an idea. But you know, we had this great field of soybeans, and we were going to like how we're going to get a mixed species cover crop out there in a timely fashion. Again, I wanted to get it broadcast early. So we had an old lily spreader. I didn't have any way to, at the time, you couldn't buy mixed species cover crop in a tote or bags, to my knowledge. So I had to figure out a way that I was going to do that. So this is old lily spreader, and added in an auger here to actually mix the seed as it is being broadcast. So that auger is reversed, it's driven off of the spinner. There's a little hub there. Just mount that in there, and as you're broadcasting, it's going to mix those seeds. Keep them mixed throughout, because there was a concern that, hey, if you got small seed, large seed, they potentially could settle out. You just throw, if you had clover or something small, you just throw it all out to start with. But in this case, it really worked well. And you can see the pictures. I think it done pretty good. So we did that through standing soybeans. And I didn't have any way to really do that, so I had to borrow a tractor with really narrow tires. Wasn't high crop, but it was kind of set up high crop, so we ran through there and broadcast that right at leaf drop. They were starting to yellow. So it aided in germination, and this is some of the results that we had. So you can see pretty good thick stand that we had there, so I would consider that success. But here, I don't know if some of you may know this individual, but this is the guy that kind of exposed me to mixed species cover crops. He brought around this crazy guy named Ray Archuleta, and it exposed pretty much North Carolina in the winter of 2007, I think it was. And, got us kind of thinking, and it got a lot of us energized about how we're going to do it. So I did it. But then he shows up and says, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to plant in all this? Because we were doing no-till. So you had residue maybe like this. Now we got residue that's 5 or 6 foot tall. How are we going to plant into it? I hadn't really put a lot of thought into it, but this is what we had. As you can see, this is not the latest, greatest, newest planter. Actually, that's the one that was Pops bought in the 80s. First true no-till planter. And the biggest thing about this is that's all it really takes. It doesn't take the fanciest new. If you got it, that's fine. There's a lot of attachments. We can spend some time this afternoon looking at planters, talking about attachments. But, we utilize this. But the big thing is to pay attention to details. You will find out real quick if your planter is wore out or not trying to plant into these systems. All right, so pay close attention to detail. So we had to spend some time on said planter. The great thing is everything's available. You can bolt it right on, fix it, update it, almost make a 40-year planter, 50-year planter like new again. So here's what we did. That was that same field. We didn't think anything about how we were going to condition the residue. I didn't have any way to kill it. I didn't have a self-propelled sprayer. So we actually had to get it on the soil surface before we could even terminate it. But we just planted through it standing, which is sometimes things that we do, and sometimes we get it terminated and get it rolled down on the ground as well. But we planted through it standing. You can see here where we're planting through it. Now, there was probably a lot of uneasy feeling at this point in time, especially this being our first time. We were kind of, shooting from the hip, flying by the seat of our pants, trying to make it work. And I think we did pretty good success because we were able to, paying close attention to detail, we were able to get that planter to where it could facilitate the planting action the way we wanted it. So you can see we did have success. This was kind of the day where you just, that huge weight come off your shoulders. Like, okay, we've done it to some extent. We've got a stand of corn there in that same heavy residue after it has been terminated. This is just some in-season photos. And this is leading up to harvest. You can still see there's that mat of residue. So think back to that almost initial slide where I was thinking about the challenges that we were up against, and one of them being herbicide-resistant weeds. So you think about a mat on this soil surface like this. Think about the herbicide-resistant weeds that we were faced with. What's a big one in this area? Pigweed. Pigweed. How big are pigweed seed? Tiny. What does pigweed seed need to germinate? Moisture? Sunlight, right? So what did we do, potentially, here with that heavy cover crop? We're intercepting the sunlight before it even gets to those weeds. So is this the end-all be-all? No, but it does a huge amount of good towards working towards combating those herbicide-resistant weeds. And we can talk about more challenges because there are some weeds that actually have shown up after we've already tackled some of the ones that everybody's facing. Some of the larger seeded weeds that have a lot of energy. You can see that we were still getting some benefits even leading into the harvest of that were addressing additional challenges that we were facing, right? So that's the great thing about cover crop. It's not just addressing one. It may be addressing one of your objectives, but it's going to be addressing additional objectives too that you have. So we were pretty successful in that season. Again, we started small scale on I think it was just a field that we were utilizing on then, and we did that for a couple of years to get our confidence up. And then we started branching out and thinking of additional ways to do things. So we tried different seeding methods. Of course, there's a picture of a plane. We had the broadcaster. At the time, of course, drones were not even really thought of in 2007, 8. So, you know, we were just trying things that we had access to. We didn't really have, there are self-propelled pieces of equipment that can go through the crop later in the season, but at that time, we didn't have it. So what we kind of landed on was our best and preferred seeding method is utilizing a grain drill. I know a lot of people may think that is slow, that is slow, that is slow. It may be, but think about the end result that you're looking for. And if this works, but I may have cover crop in that field, I may have it on the neighbor's house, I may have it in this field, maybe in the road, maybe in the woods. If I do get it in the field, it may be spotty, right? And then I have to wait on Mother Nature to give me adequate rainfall to get that germinated. So this does work, but thinking back to my objectives, herbicide-resistant weeds, I want that coverage across the entire field, right? So I need to think about how am I going to uniformly get the cover crop that I want across that entire field. This happens to not be it for us, right? Think about where you drive in here. If I got a 20-acre crop field, what kind of terrain do they have to deal with? Can they adequately get it across that entire acreage very uniform? And our area just doesn't lend itself to that. And that's a big reason why we don't have a lot of air service in this area. They want big square fields that are flat, usually. So preferred seeding method, we still do broadcast some on just areas that we can't get this to. And it still works. But preferred method, we will utilize this. That's the great thing about having some young boys. We got 2 of these, turn them loose, right? Just keep getting it. And basically, if you can, chase the harvest equipment, chase the combine. So we also thought about, instead of just planting straight through it, we wanted to think about how can we get all that cover on the ground beforehand to facilitate planting. Because back to that old 4630 and that old Kingsley planter, how successful do you think, how straight were my rows, right? Didn't have guidance on that tractor. Guidance really wasn't available to speak of there, so we were still trying to utilize row markers and things like that. So in some cases, 6 foot tall, you couldn't even really see where you were going. So we wanted to get that on the soil surface to where we could at least, you know, get a better feeling about where we were planting, how we were planting. Another thing a challenge that arose from this was that's got to roll the same direction or the same width as the planter, right? This doesn't have guidance, that didn't have guidance. You know, there's issues there. Also, with this short 15 foot or this 15 foot width cultipacker, you know, we think about, you know, an open station tractor running through this, and I will say there is a job vacancy for this. Anyone
that was my job.
Yeah, anyone that's tolerant to allergies, this would be a good position for you. But we've graduated from this, but we wanted to get that residue on the soil surface. Again, thinking back to our objectives. So I got a short video. This is where we came to. So you can see already where it's been rolled down. This is, of course, making a separate pass from the actual planter. And we can have other discussions on why we do separate passes in some instances. But you can see we're utilizing a piece of equipment that was for a conventional tillage system, right? Cultipacker that we're just using to roll down that cover. And then we'll follow those same passes with the planting tractor to utilize the same guidance lines. So we've come quite a ways from old Kingsley road markers to now using GPS, trying to plant on the same guidance lines. Then we started really, you know, we're a couple years into this, and every year we make some changes. We kind of, in our mind, upgrade to some extent. But, you know, as the years go by, we're doing this, we're kind of starting to question, like, is what we're doing making a difference, right? So we think about, and we started seeing change. And this is 2 fields, our field's on the left, neighbor on the right. And both of those were planted roughly the same day in cotton. So we can already see some noticeable differences to some extent in the fields. Of course, right in the center is the separation of the 2 fields. And we got to thinking about what are the benefits of the cover crop. So it happened to be at that time it was really, really hot. It was one of those 100+ days that we got, and this was years ago. But measuring soil temperature in the field to the left, we saw at an inch deep it was 85 degrees. The field to the right, the soil temp was 105 degrees an inch deep, where no cover was. And I think that one actually had some vertical tillage prior to planting. So you can see that those managements and those systems are quite different. No-till with cover crops, some variation of conservation tillage with cotton with no cover crop. So we can see huge differences that we were seeing in that. And it was very obvious in the looks of the actual crop as well, with it being both the same, planted at the same time, and very noticeable difference. So we started seeing those benefits. Because we think about, well, what's the difference in 20 degrees? What's that going to do? Any ideas? What's 20 degrees cooler going to do? It could be higher yield, possibly, right? It's going to conserve more moisture, right? Let's relate it to ourselves. Am I going to be more active in 85 or 105? Right? So just think about it that way and think about how that relates to the crop. We also wanted to think about how much nitrogen were we going to be able to account for the legume that we put in our cover crop, right? Because we had to think about, I'm adding something to my management. I'm paying for something else. Is it going to be providing a cost on or a return on investment, right? So let's take and look at a short example of the value or contributions of a cover crop, mixed cover crop. So looking here, this year I did this comparison. I don't remember which year. I do have urea at 615. Does anybody know what urea is right now? No ideas. I did a quick Google search and I found it all over the place, from $400-something to almost $700. So I'm not certain. We don't utilize a lot of urea anymore, so that's not something I keep. But at the time, it was $615 a ton, and it equated out to about 67 cents per pound of N. Looking at crimson clover, seeding rate of 15 pounds at 97 cents a pound, it cost me $14.55 an acre. The rye, 40 pounds, a quarter per pound, $9.60 an acre, total of $24.15 per acre for the cover crop only. And then there's the urea again. So looking at the contributions or the value of that legume cover crop, so crimson clover has the capability, and this is coming out of managing cover crops profitably, a range of 70 to 130 pounds of N per acre. That's what it can contribute. Now there are a lot of factors in that range, right? I couldn't plant it in December and kill it in March and expect any of that number, more than likely. But if it's managed intensively, you could get somewhere between that 70 to 130. Okay, so that's already a benefit to me as the producer. All right, so looking at 70 pounds, if I'm going to go on the low side, 70 pounds times that 67 cent per pound of N gives me roughly a value of $46.90 per acre in nitrogen, potentially. If I got the 130, it'd be a potential of $87.11 per acre benefit, right? But on our example, we're going to stay on the low end. So looking at just the cost comparisons, my cover crop cost me $24.15 per acre, and I'm going to assume that it's going to give me 70 pounds in. If I did the equivalent or the replacement of that, didn't have the cover crop, and I wanted to just apply 70 units of urea, it cost me $46.90 per acre, just to get that same 70. So just, taking the difference between those two, per acre benefit, I get $22.75. I'm to the good just by utilizing the cover crop. Then we're only looking at the legume component of the cover crop, just producing nitrogen. That's the only thing we're looking at. Think back to that original slide. What are some additional benefits that we're getting? We're having lower soil temperature. We're having less herbicide-resistant weeds. We're having less erosion. How do we put dollar figures on all of those? Again, we could be here all day talking about those, but I'm looking here specifically at nitrogen. So we see the cover crop alone has nearly paid for itself just in its legume, the nitrogen contribution that it has. So it was a no-brainer for us as operators to keep including that in our operation. So we still ask the question, have we improved soil health? So I went back and looked at soil samples on the same field for a period of years. Now, these are not all from the same lab, but they supposedly all use the same methods for determining organic matter from the samples that were sent, which is loss on ignition. So starting in 2006, this was just no-till. We were at 0.71. 2008, that was the first year we did cover crop. We're still at 0.71. 2013, 1.68. 2016, 1.91. The last year I had samples on that field in 2020, it showed 3.32. Now, are those right? I don't know. But the biggest thing is the trend. I am increasing that organic matter. So I know that is positive. And it's a positive, increasing organic matter as an operator, that's going to help, right? Thinking about the benefits of that. Because I'm thinking more of what can that organic matter do alone in contributions to my cropping system. Of course, more water holding capacity, more capability of cycling more nutrients, in addition to the cover crop that I'm already doing. So we are seeing that trend is positive, which is good in my eyes. It gives me a good feeling that we are doing the right thing in adopting cover crops as part of our rotation. So we still think about, what can we do to justify or support the cover crops that we're doing. And one thing that we have done, this is some work that we did with Dr. Alan Franzlubers. We also worked with Dr. Buzz Clute out of South Carolina. We worked with Dr. Chris Reedberg Horton out of NC State. And anytime that we had the opportunity to participate in those projects, we've done it. Because hopefully the information that they got from their studies was going to help us, justify or give us a good standing on what you're doing in that system is helping you build soil health. And these are kind of, I apologize for the graphs. I'm going to give you the Cliff Note versions of this, or a very simplified version. So in looking at this graph, on the left axis we have plant nitrogen uptake. The bottom is a flush of CO2. And that flush of CO2 is showing activity of biology. That's showing how many people are at the party. Is it just a couple people at a table, or is it standing room only? So if you have a higher number of a flush of CO2, that just shows that there's a lot of people there. And then plant uptake nitrogen, of course, that's pretty specific there. And it shows that across all the sites that he did this study, that we see the plant uptake was higher as the flush of CO2 was higher. So that gives me an idea that more biology, more plant uptake. Well, how do I get more biology? Well, I got to support them for one thing. I got to give them a place to live. I got to feed them. The system has to support that. So you can almost think and look at this graph and kind of find different operations. The ones on the left could be conventional, could be no-till. The ones going up the graph or up the bar could be ones that are utilizing cover crops, right? And they're supporting more biology because that flush of CO2 is higher, which in turn is getting more plant nitrogen uptake. So we're getting more nutrients into that plant as we increase more biology in that soil. Again, ties back to a system that supports that. Here's another graph. This one really kind of made dollars and cents to support the system that we're doing. So looking, and we've all been told, this is on the left graph, this is pounds of N needed for a bushel of grain. So anywhere you look, it could be 1 to 1.4 is what I've seen on recommendations. And as a producer, that's what we kind of use and gauge is I need 200 pounds of N to get 200 bushels of corn. Well, not so fast, and maybe not in every case, because we can see that the dots show that anywhere from 0 to 1 pound per 1 pound of N gives you 1 bushel of grain. Those dots are all over the place. Some of these systems are a lot more efficient and are able to give that bushel of grain with less than that 1 pound. Okay, so as a producer that's doing cover crops and soil health, I want to know where I'm at on that graph. I think I would love to be on that bottom line, but I know I'm not because we're always making improvements, but we're kind of right there in that middle. So 0.6 pounds of N to make a bushel of grain. So does that turn into money? Absolutely. Or could I apply less and still get the same yield? Right? So we have to look at what is our cost of production. Can we lower that cost of production? So that's the real benefits. Now, I wanted to show, all the other slides were kind of showing benefits to address, challenges that we were facing, but there's always going to be growing pains. There's going to be the unexpected, right? So implementing new management is going to bring some unforeseen things. This is a picture from a couple years ago. We had already had the cover crop rolled down. Did it in one pass with one tractor, coming back and following the same guidance lines. But operator turned around, went up a pass against the grain. Moisture had already hit the ground. The dew had already hit the ground, and you can see what kind of mess we turned into. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? We have to understand what we might get into. Maybe we should have stopped right before the dew fell, potentially. Or maybe we should have followed the same guidance line. But there are potential problems there. This is also a fall of 1 year. I will say, to my defense, this is a field that is highly impacted by wildlife. So they graze on the soybeans pretty intensively and open a lot of sunlight. But not to my defense, to my detriment, I didn't get that cover crop terminated when I should have. So if you can see, that's radish. This in my soybeans there. So of course we think that's a deal breaker to some extent, but it turned out fine. Radishes, they do stink when they're mixed with soybeans in a combine, but when the moisture comes out of them, they just dry up in little pieces of paper, almost what it looks like. So it didn't have huge problems. Luckily, we just only had a small amount of acres that did this. So note to self, get your cover crop terminated before it makes viable seed. And that's just, we get behind. Everybody gets behind, but we have to think about these things in these systems when they provide us these challenges. Also, infield conditions. These are, I will say that a majority of the soils that we farm are relatively shallow to real shallow in some cases. And what we have noticed since we've started implementing cover crops is we're seeing a lot of water starting to just pop out of hills that didn't used to happen. So you can see, and we'll be right beside this area, pretty close to it. And this area in that picture, it will run water now a majority of the year. Even in the dry times, that area will be running water. And it didn't used to do that prior to implementing cover crops. And it's not just this one. Seems like a lot of fields are starting to show some signs of these areas. And me thinking that, well, I'm getting more water into the soil profile, right, potentially. So now it's got to exit out. In the past, that water would have likely just ran off the soil surface. So it is good and bad, but we can see that this is something that are new challenges that we're having to deal with. So I have excessive moisture, also dryness. We have to think about that management of those cover crops and think about going into the spring and think about termination. And we'll talk about this more in the field, but if we don't terminate in time, that could really set us up to pull a lot of moisture out of our soil profile. So we really need to think about that going into the spring planting season, is when are we going to time that termination to where we don't get into the problem of having dryness. Because this time of year we'll go out and the cover in the one field is, there's 12 inches. When we get to the end of March, first week or two of April, it's going to go from that to this. So there's a lot of changes. So as producers, we have to really be on top of what we're doing and looking to the weather forecaster to kind of see what kind of spring we're going to have and make termination decisions. So that is it. I don't know as far as time, but I know there's a question and answer period after the next presentation. But if you have a burning question as we transition speakers.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone has questions for Nathan, go ahead and ask him.
Yes.
Can you spread pre-emerge?
What
does it do with the cover crop, the matting?
No, all we're applying is just a burn down. We use very little residual herbicides. We used to use atrazine quite a bit, and my question to extension researchers was, if it's just getting on the residue cover, is it ever making it to the soil surface? And I guess it could to some extent if it's getting washed off and getting into the soil surface, that may be it. But in a lot of cases, the weeds that I'm now faced with, the residual herbicides that we have access to don't do very much for them anyway. Yes?
Thank you for that presentation, Nathan. How many species are you working with now? I know at the beginning you said you were just working with monoculture system, but that you now diversified. So what's the sort of most common species density?
So our base cover crop will be cereal rye, crimson clover, vetch, and radish.
Okay.
That is always the base, and it could be more than that, just depending on the year and availability, but at least those 4 species will be in it.
And rye is always the dominant?
Pretty much. We've used barley in the past, we've used triticale in the past, but rye is really the go-to.
And you reduce the rate.
Yep, and we're continually reducing rates on that cover crop. All right. I'll be around all day, so any questions?